Hey there, book lovers! Welcome back to Blooming Reads Folk Girl. If you love thrilling adventures, mind-blowing discoveries, and stories that make you think, then you're in for a treat. Today, we're diving into the final and most intense part of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. In episode 2, we followed the time traveller as he arrived in the year 800,2701 AD. At first, the world seemed peaceful, filled with gentle, childlike beings called the Eloi. But then he discovered something terrifying: the Morlocks, pale, monstrous creatures living in the darkness below. What were they hiding? And what terrible secret connected them to the Eloi? Now, in episode 3, the truth will be revealed, and it's worse than the time traveller ever imagined. Buckle up, this is going to be intense. The Morlocks' secrets. The time traveller stood frozen in place, his heart pounding. He had seen one of them, a Morlock climbing out of the well. The pale creature had stared at him with glowing red eyes, its thin, ghostly fingers twitching. Then, just as suddenly, it had disappeared back in darkness. But now he knew the truth. The Eloi were not alone in this world. Beneath their feet, another civilization existed, one that thrived in the shadows, one that the Eloi were terrified of. The time traveller had to know more. He had to see what was down there. So the next day, when the Eloi were distracted, he made his way to one of the mysterious wells scattered across the landscape. With a deep breath, he climbed inside. Next chapter, into the darkness. As he descended, the air grew cold and damp. The light from above faded, swallowed by the shadows. Then he heard them, low, guttural sounds, the sound of machinery humming deep underground, and the soft, eerie scuttling of feet moving in the darkness. He reached the bottom and looked around. What he saw sent chills down his spine. The underground tunnels were massive, stretching into complete blackness. Strange metal machines whirred and clanked, their purpose unknown. The walls were covered in grime, and the smell of blood and decay filled the air. And then he saw them. The Morlocks, dozens of pale, inhuman creatures with long fingers, sharp teeth, and hungry, glowing eyes. They moved like spiders, creeping along the floors and walls, completely at home in the darkness. The time traveller hid behind a machine, his breath shallow. He could hear the breathing, hear their strange whispers echoing through the tunnels. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Next chapter. The truth about the Eloi. There were bones scattered across the floor, human bones. At first, he refused to believe it, but then he saw something even worse. A Morlock dragging an Eloi into the darkness. The realization hit him like a hammer. The Eloi were not the rulers of this world. They were livestock. The Morlocks had domesticated them like cattle. The Eloi lived simple, carefree lives because they were being bred for food. This was the future of humanity. A society that had once been advanced had split into two species, one that lived in ignorance above the ground and one that fed on them below. The traveller felt sick. He had to get out. Next chapter, the chase through the tunnels. He turned to leave, but his foot slipped. A rock clattered loudly against the metal floor. Instantly, the Morlocks turned. A guttural snarl echoed through the tunnels. Then they attacked. The time traveller ran. The Morlocks screeched and howled, their glowing eyes racing toward him. He could hear their nails scraping against the walls, their heavy footsteps pounding behind him. He grabbed a matchbox from his pocket. With a flick, he lit a match. The Morlocks shrieked in fear. They hated fire. He waved the flame in front of him, forcing them back. Then he ran for his life. He scrambled up the well, clawing his way to the surface. Just as the Morlocks lunged, he burst into daylight. The creatures howled in pain and disappeared back into the well, retreating from the sun. The time traveller collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. He was alive, but he had one last problem. Next chapter. The time machine is missing. He needed to escape this nightmare world. He needed to go home. But when he returned to the White Sphinx, where he had left his time machine, it was gone. His heart stopped. The Morlocks had taken it. If he couldn't get it back, he would be trapped in this future forever. Next chapter. The final battle. As night fell, the Morlocks came for him, hundreds of them emerging from the darkness. The time traveller lit a torch, swinging it wildly as they surrounded him. Then he saw it. His time machine. The Morlocks had dragged it into the Sphinx's chamber. With a final burst of strength, he charged forward, kicking and shoving through the creatures. He reached the machine, jumped in, and yanked the lever. Whoosh! Light exploded around him. The Morlocks screamed, and then the world disappeared. Next chapter. The end of time. The time traveller flew through time faster than ever. Centuries rushed past in seconds. He saw cities rise and full oceans dry up, mountains crumble into dust. Then he reached the end. The sun was huge and red, barely glowing. The sky was dark. The air was cold. The earth was dying. Strange creatures crawled across a frozen beach. The wind howled in eerie silence. It was the end of the world. Terrified, he pulled the lever again, and finally, he returned home. Next chapter. The final mystery. His guests stared at him in shock. "You're lying," Philby said. The time traveller just smiled. "Come back tomorrow. I'll bring proof." The next day, he stepped into the time machine again and vanished. He was never seen again. This is the end of the story. The question for you: do you believe his story? Where did he go? Did he travel further into the future, or was he lost in time forever? If you love thrilling stories like this, we highly recommend reading The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. You can find the book link in the description box below. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more amazing stories. Until next time, keep imagining, keep exploring, and keep reading.